So today, I want to talk about something that most people can feel in their daily lives but cannot quite explain in precise economic terms. You know something is wrong. You work as hard as your parents did. You are educated. You are employed. And yet somehow the financial stability that your parents achieved, the house, the savings, the sense that next year will be a little better than this year, that stability feels permanently out of reach in a way that has nothing to do with your personal choices or your personal effort. And I want to explain to you today exactly why that is. Not in vague sociological terms, not in political rhetoric, but in precise economic mechanisms. Because the middle class is not disappearing because people stop trying. It is disappearing because specific, identifiable, structural forces are compressing it from above and below simultaneously. And understanding those forces is the first step toward understanding what is actually happening to your economic life. Let me start with a definition. When I talk about the middle class, I mean something very specific. I mean households that can cover their basic needs, afford occasional luxuries, save for the future, and reasonably expect their children to have a similar or better standard of living. That is the core promise of the middle class. Not wealth, not luxury, stability, security, and forward progress. And that promise is being broken not by bad luck, but by arithmetic, by the mathematics of how modern economies distribute the gains and losses of the global system. The first mechanism I want to walk you through is the energy cost squeeze. Energy is not just one item in a household budget. Energy is embedded in every item in a household budget. The food you eat was grown using fertilizer, produced from natural gas, harvested using diesel-powered machinery, processed in energy-intensive facilities, and transported to your store in diesel-powered trucks. The clothing you wear was manufactured in factories powered by electricity. The house you live in was built using energy-intensive materials and is heated or cooled every day. Every good and service you purchase has an energy cost embedded in its production and delivery. When energy prices rise, the cost of everything rises. Not the cost of energy alone, the cost of everything. And here is the crucial asymmetry that makes this mechanism so damaging to the middle class specifically. When energy costs rise, corporations do not absorb those costs. They pass them through to consumers in higher prices. But wages do not automatically rise to match. There is no mechanism in the modern economy that ensures your salary increases when the price of energy increases. So every time energy prices spike, the purchasing power of middle-class wages shrinks. Not dramatically, not in a single catastrophic event, but persistently, year after year, the gap between what you earn and what things cost widens. And that widening gap is the disappearing middle class made visible in everyday life. This is why the current conflict in the Middle East is not just a geopolitical story. It is a cost of living story for every middle class household on earth. The Strait of Hormuz disruption, rising oil prices, elevated gas and electricity bills, higher fertilizer costs that push food prices up, more expensive logistics that add cost to every manufactured good, all of it flows through the energy cost transmission mechanism directly into middle-class household budgets. The geopolitics are far away. The energy price impact lands at your grocery store, your gas station, and your utility bill every month. And if you are finding this analysis useful, please subscribe. I cover these structural economic mechanisms every week because this is analysis that mainstream financial commentary is not providing to ordinary people. The second mechanism is the asset price inflation trap. Over the past 40 years, and particularly since the 2008 financial crisis, central banks around the world maintained interest rates at historically low levels and engaged in quantitative easing, which means creating new money and injecting it into the financial system. The stated purpose was to stimulate economic growth. The actual effect was broad asset price inflation. Houses, stocks, bonds, commercial real estate. Every asset class that wealthy people hold in large quantities became dramatically more expensive. The S&P 500 increased by approximately 600% between 2009 and 2022. House prices in major cities doubled, tripled, and in some cases quadrupled over the same period. Now think about what this means for the middle class. If you already owned a house and a stock portfolio in 2009, the past 15 years made you dramatically wealthier. Your net worth grew not because you worked harder or created more value. It grew because the monetary system inflated the price of the things you already owned. But if you were a young person entering the workforce after 2008, trying to buy your first house or build your first investment portfolio, you faced a completely different reality. The assets you needed to acquire to join the property-owning middle class had become dramatically more expensive relative to the wages you were earning. The entry price went up. The wages did not keep pace. And the result is a middle class that is dividing along generational lines into those who got in before the inflation and those who are locked out. The mathematics are stark. In 1980, the median American home cost approximately 3 times the median annual household income. Today, it costs approximately 6 to 8 times the median annual household income, depending on the city. The ratio has doubled. A young household today must save for twice as many years or take on twice as much debt to achieve the same housing security their parents achieved. And the larger mortgages required mean more of every paycheck goes to a bank and less goes to savings, investment, or building wealth. The middle class is being squeezed not by poverty, but by the cost of entry into the assets that define middle class security. If you have not subscribed yet, please do that now. The mechanisms I am describing connect directly to decisions you can make about your own financial life right now. The third mechanism is wage stagnation relative to productivity. Since approximately 1970, worker productivity in developed economies has continued to increase. The average worker produces more per hour today than 50 years ago. Technology, better processes, better tools, better organizational systems, all of it has made labor more productive. But wages in real terms, adjusted for inflation, have not kept pace with that productivity growth. The gains from productivity increases have been captured almost entirely by capital, by the owners of companies and holders of financial assets, rather than by labor, by the workers in those companies. In the 3 decades following World War II, wages and productivity grew at approximately the same rate. This was the period that created the mass middle class in America, in Europe, and in other developed economies. Workers received a growing share of a growing pie. That was the arithmetic foundation of middle-class expansion. Since approximately 1980, that arithmetic changed fundamentally. Productivity has grown by approximately 60% in the United States since then, while median wages have grown by approximately 15% in real terms over the same period. The 45 percentage point gap between those two numbers is not an abstraction. It represents real economic value that workers produced but did not receive. That value flowed instead to shareholders, to senior executives whose compensation is tied to share prices, and to the owners of capital more broadly. And the middle class, which depends on wages rather than capital ownership for the majority of its income, has been slowly and systematically impoverished by this divergence over 4 decades. The process is invisible in any single year. It is unmistakable across a generation. The fourth mechanism is the globalization of labor competition. When trade barriers fell across the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, and global supply chains integrated the labor forces of China, India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and dozens of other developing nations into the global economy, the effective supply of labor available to global corporations increased by hundreds of millions of workers almost overnight in historical terms. The basic economic logic is simple and unavoidable. When supply increases dramatically, price falls. The price of labor is wages. A factory worker in Ohio was now competing indirectly, but really and consequentially, with a factory worker in Shenzhen willing to do equivalent work for a fraction of the wage. This competition did not eliminate middle-class manufacturing jobs overnight. It eroded them gradually and in most cases irreversibly across 3 decades. The manufacturing towns of the American Midwest, the industrial cities of northern England, the factory regions of northern France, and the Ruhr Valley in Germany all experienced versions of the same phenomenon. High-wage, middle-class jobs that required physical skill and reliability, but not advanced credentials, were replaced by lower-wage service sector jobs offering less stability and no path to accumulation. And the workers who lost those jobs discovered that the post-industrial economy had far fewer pathways to middle-class stability that did not require university degrees taking years and significant investment to obtain. The economic promise that had been made to an entire generation that showing up, working hard, and acquiring practical skills would be enough to secure a middle-class life was broken not by individual failure, but by the structural reorganization of the global economy. And the political consequences of that broken promise are visible across every developed democracy today in the form of rising populism, declining trust in institutions, and the angry search for explanations that mainstream economic commentary has consistently failed to provide. Now, let me bring these four mechanisms together because it is their combination that creates the specific pressure the middle class is experiencing and makes that pressure so difficult to escape through individual effort alone. Rising energy costs reduce real purchasing power without anyone cutting your pay. Asset price inflation prices younger households out of the ownership that anchors middle-class stability across generations. The divergence between productivity and wages means workers capture a shrinking share of the value they create. And global labor competition eliminated the high-wage industrial employment that once provided middle-class incomes without requiring professional credentials. These are not temporary conditions. They are structural features of the global economy as organized over the past 4 decades, and they compound. Rising energy costs make it harder to save for a down payment. Inability to own assets means missing the wealth gains that asset owners capture. Stagnant wages mean less ability to absorb rising prices. Each mechanism makes the others worse. The world your parents described, where hard work reliably produced financial stability and the expectation of forward progress, was built on specific structural conditions that are no longer in place. Cheap energy that kept the cost of everything manageable. Rising real wages that meant each generation started from a slightly better position than the last. Accessible asset prices that allowed ordinary workers to accumulate property and financial security through steady saving over a working lifetime. And a manufacturing sector that provided high-wage employment to workers without university degrees, giving the majority of the population a realistic path into economic stability that did not require decades of education and credential accumulation. Those conditions existed together for approximately 30 years following World War II. They created the middle class as a mass social phenomenon. They have been eroding for approximately 50 years since, slowly enough that the erosion was easy to deny in any given decade and easy to attribute to personal failure rather than structural change. But the cumulative effect of 50 years of erosion is now visible and undeniable. The promise of the middle class is genuinely difficult to fulfill for a large and growing share of the population in every developed economy, not because of personal failure, because of structural arithmetic. Subscribe for more analysis of these structural economic realities explained clearly and plainly. And tell me in the comments, which of these 4 mechanisms is hitting hardest where you live? And do you think the next generation will fare better or worse? See you next time.